Right, starting to see some familiar faces. Welcome, everyone. Maybe as you're coming in, just throw in the chat where you're calling from. Nadia let us know exactly where she's calling from. Vancouver. Beautiful up there this time of year. I wish I was there, not in the hot DC. Hiram, nice to see you. Just had a chat with you recently. Jay, great to see you. Paul, we haven't met, but good to see you. Johnson, great to see you. I owe you an email. Where's the chat? There we go. We'll wait a few more minutes while people are coming in. Milwaukee, Louisville, Arkansas. Good to see you, Stan. Excellent. Welcome to those who have just joined. Gerald, great to see you. We'll wait just another minute or two. See, some people are calling from their car. That's some commitment. Love to see that. Hiram, it looks like you're about to do a podcast with us. What do you think, Ryan? Should we get going?
I think we are ready here. It looks like everyone's come in the room who has joined so far. Why don't you kick us off, Steve?
All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Ardent Mentoring webinar. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for being here and taking time out of your busy schedules. We know a lot of people we work with and serve are extremely busy, and I know you are, so thank you so much for taking the time. I want to say thank you to Logan Hope, who has done so much to make this webinar possible. She has worked very hard to make sure that everything goes well. If something doesn't go well, I promised her we would laugh about it, so please laugh if anything goes wrong. And of course, Stephen Robertson, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're traveling and doing a seminar for Vistage, and you've found a place in your hotel that looks like you're at home in your office, so that's great. So thank you, everyone. We asked Gerald if he'd kick us off and pray for our time.
Lord and Father, we just thank you for this opportunity to gather together. And as Steve said, we've taken the time to come together and the effort and the commitment. We thank you for that, Lord. We thank you for everyone at Ardent who have made this webinar available for us to learn and grow and develop, and the great work that they're doing with entrepreneurs and helping them grow their businesses and develop as people who are responsible citizens wherever they are in this global world. We also pray for Mr. Stephen Robertson as he delivers the message, Lord. Thank you for the time that he's taken to make an effort to present us with this important topic on perspectives and taking our challenges and making them into opportunities. And may we bless his speaking and guide him throughout it. And we thank you for the Holy Spirit and invite the Holy Spirit and the anointing of the Holy Spirit to be upon him. And we ask that it may penetrate not only in our heads, but also in our hearts. And may we take something from it and grow in the process. And thank you, and help us enjoy the time together. And be fruitful. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen.
Well, good morning. My name is Ryan King, and for those of you that have yet to meet, it is a privilege to be on this webinar with each of you. Stephen Robertson is one of my favorite people in the world, and so I'm really excited to hear from him. For those that don't know me, I get the honor of serving as Ardent's CEOs and as Ardent CEO and one of our co-founders, excuse me. And just before I begin and introduce Ardent and introduce Steve, I just want to say, if you have any questions during the chat, you can put them into the chat throughout the webinar, and Logan will go ahead and put those questions in chronological order for when we begin to go through our Q&A. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your busy day, like Steve said. Ardent creates affordable access to world-class Christian entrepreneurs for high-capacity social entrepreneurs to be mentored in order to scale their enterprises so that they can multiply their impact. When my 8-year-old daughter, Georgia Grace, asks me, "Dad, what do you do all day upstairs on that computer?" I say, "Georgia, I help people who are helping people help more people." And that's the heart of the work that we do here at Ardent. We want to see a greater amount of transformed lives around the world. And we're inspired by the work that the entrepreneurs who we have the privilege of serving do as they make a social and spiritual impact in the world. And so we come alongside of these entrepreneurs to provide one-on-one connections with highly successful, highly experienced, world-class Christian entrepreneurs who have subject matter expertise to offer to these mentees in a very affordable way. Especially as we work globally, we do a lot of hard work behind the scenes to raise money for scholarship funds in order to create access that is affordable and available to many people around the globe who otherwise might not have access to this level of executive mentoring. And we do it in a way that is focused on the specifics of what the entrepreneur is going through in this season. We dive deep into the needs and the challenges of each entrepreneur that we serve. We look at the context that they're serving within and the industry that they're part of, and also the impact they're making. And then behind the scenes, we do the work to match these amazing entrepreneurs with some incredible mentors, these world-class Christian entrepreneurs we speak of. And we look at their skills and competencies and their experience and their expertise, and also what they're inspired by. And we're able to create these incredible matches, of which we've done over 120 over the last 2 years. We currently are actively serving around 85 enterprises month over month. And it's just so exciting to see the impact that is being made globally. The money that's being raised, the boards that are being formed, the private equity that's being learned about, the fundraising and marketing strategies that are being developed, the hiring and firing that's being learned about, how to do well, how to do in an honoring way. I could go on, and the impact that's being made in the lives of children and women and families around the world, providing much needed jobs and economy, saving people out of slavery and sexual human trafficking, working to provide food and housing. And I could just name so much. So it's really an inspiration and a privilege to wake up every day and get to do what I do. And one of those amazing mentors who is also a board member at Ardent is Stephen Robertson. And I get the privilege of introducing him today and getting to learn from him. And Stephen Robertson actually has 2 Ardent mentees that he's working with, and one happens to be me. So I can really attest to the fact that Steve has a lot to offer us. And I have learned so much, Steve. I think in our 19 sessions together or something like that, Steve has helped me propel. I really equate much of Ardent's success to what Steve has taught me over the last 2 years and what he's helped me work through and what he's helped me take advantage of. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Stephen Robertson. He's the founder of Bold Training, which helps businesses stay relevant and reach the next generation in a relevant way, work through hiring practices and how to really equip them to maximize their potential. And he helps CEOs and executives lead this next generation, often referred to as Gen Z, amongst other generations that are out there. And beyond what I've already said, Stephen Robertson is an author. He's an incredible podcaster and an amazing speaker. And if you have not read his book, Aliens Among Us, not only is it the best titled book I've ever heard of personally, but it's actually an incredible book. And it's really taught me a lot as I lead an organization and as I work globally to help those in need and to have others help me. So, Steve, I would like to turn over the floor to you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you all for being here today. This is a passion for me to talk about the next generation. But before we dive into it, I just want to tell you why it matters. It matters because I truly believe that this generation, which we call the next generation, it's made up of two generations, Gen Z and Alpha generation. I really believe they're going to unlock the kingdom. And so there is something so important about them. So I'm going to give you a whole lot of data today. I'm going to show you a whole lot of data points and try and explain to you something that's really deep and takes a lot more than the time we have today. But my heart is just that you'd have a shift in perspective. When we see entrepreneurs, when we see mentors that have a shift in perspective, that's sometimes all it takes for them to start looking at a challenge in a new way to navigate that in such a way that we have an outcome that is exciting and successful. So I'm going to dive into a presentation. So I'm going to just share my screen. The slides are amazing and funny. If you don't get it, please text me and I'll explain each of the slides to you just so that you can follow along with me. And then that was an attempt at humor. And let me just share my screen with you. Okay. Are we good? Stephen, Ryan, Logan, are we seeing the right screen? Excellent. So I just want to begin with one of my favorite stories of all time, and it's set for those of you. I'm in Ohio today at the home of Ohio State University, the Buckeyes. I can see it out of the window. That's where I am today. But so a football story is appropriate, right? And this is a football story, and it starts when Teddy Roosevelt in 1905 was going to cancel the game of football. You see, what had happened in 1904 and 1905 is there were 157 critical injuries directly as a result of how violent the game of football was. And there were actually 19 deaths. And so Teddy Roosevelt, the president, decides, by the way, his son was just going to university and playing football there. He decides to get the coaches together and say to them, what we've got to do is we have to try harder, not to get our athletes injured or even killed. And for those of you that are in leadership, you know that telling someone to try harder has zero impact or effect. In fact, there's usually zero results from that. There has to be significantly more to that. So in 1906, what they did was they introduced to the game of football the forward pass. Now, I'm from Africa. I've been living in the United States for 25 years, and I never knew that there was a time in football that there wasn't a forward pass, right? And so for me, I was like, what? There wasn't a forward? Well, I can imagine in 1906, the people that were fans saying like, what are they doing? Now they're going to start to throw the ball around the place. That's not football. What are they doing? And as we go through this journey, we get to 1906 September, the first game of the season. St. Louis University is playing against Carroll College. Today, Carroll College is known as Carroll University. And Coach Eddie Kochums is the coach for St. Louis University. Follow along, because this is a great story, okay? Eddie Kochums, not only is he the coach for St. Louis, but he's brand new. First game of the season, brand new coach. His quarterback, Bradbury Robinson. I'm Robertson, son of Robert. Not really, but I would be. He's son of Robin. I'm not sure if he was, but Bradbury Robinson is the quarterback. Now think about this. He has never in his entire career thrown a football in a game because you weren't allowed to. You would hand it off, and this is what this gentleman on the slide is practicing, and then they would run sometimes into a wall of giant men and make some yards, sometimes not. So here we have the game. People in the stands are like, oh, new coach, what's he going to do? Bradbury's first play of the game. St. Louis has the ball. Bradbury looks to Coach Eddie Kochums. He gets the signal for a pass. Now, if I'm Bradbury, I'm like, what are you doing? He drops back, throws the ball, and it lands with a thud on the ground. Now, if you know anything about football, you know that in modern football, you have 4 chances to complete 10 yards. Well, in the day when the rule came out, an incomplete pass was an immediate turnover. So this first play of the game, the ball lands with a thud on the ground, and guess what happens? Carroll College gets the ball. I know that in the stands, already they were saying, is it too soon to get rid of this coach? I can guarantee you some of the players were like, is it too soon to get rid of this coach? Well, it didn't take long for them to get the ball back. Second play of the game for St. Louis. Eddie Kochums calls a pass. Bradbury drops back and throws the ball. And this time, he reaches the outstretched hands of Jack Schneider, who catches the ball and runs and runs and runs into the end zone for the first completed pass in football and the first completed pass for a touchdown in football. Come on, that you see AI is even applauding. That's a great story. But you know what goes on? Listen, there's more. They go on to win the game 22-0. They go on to have an undefeated season 11-0. And they go on to outscore their opponents 407-11. You see, all I want you to see in the story is that at some point, I would have expected coach number 5, coach number 6 to think, what's going on here? They must have been in the hundreds or 200s by then in terms of points scored. Not one of the 11 coaches changed their minds, their strategy, or their perspective. 407-11. You see, if those coaches were on this webinar, they would be looking at this picture right now, and they would be saying, man, that river looks awesome. When in fact, it's not a river, it's a garden wall. Who of you could see a garden wall there? Who of you can see a river? Some of you would go to your grave saying that's a river. No, it's a garden wall. That's what you're looking at. And that is why a change of perspective always precedes a change of behavior and attitude, because not one of those coaches could see a garden wall. Not one of those coaches could see how powerful a pass would be. And they went down 407-11. So I want you to leave today with a change of perspective. And the way to begin that is to start to just position your heart in a different way. We're going to get through a lot of content today, so buckle up. I'm going to go fast. And if after today you haven't received everything you need to, please reach out to me. I'm happy to unpack it more. I'm in the business and have been for a number of years of hiring humans. In fact, we hire seasonally about 2,000 seasonal staff, a full-time team of about 55 people. And so when it comes to hiring humans, I've had an incredible amount of experience and exposure. My historical journey is that we've run summer programs for this past year, over 40,000 weeks of camp for kids from all over the globe, 140 different countries that would come to all these different universities that I work with in the States and private schools and come and experience these different versions of programs. And so today, what I'm going to unpack with you has got a lot to do with what I've learned over the last 2 decades, understanding what it takes for us to understand and reach the next generation, program for them, and train them. And what I'm really good at doing is I'm really good at seeing how do we attract, how do we train, and how do we retain this next generation in the workforce? It's a very important part of the journey. We've all struggled. I don't know how many of you have, but last year we had 167 people who didn't show up on day 1 after they'd been fully interviewed, vetted, hired, and onboarded. And so the workplace is a very different place. If we're business owners, entrepreneurs, mentors, we've all seen this and understand how important it is to know where to go. I'm going to show 3 things to you today, or I'm going to share 3 things with you. 2 of them very, very briefly. The first, I'm going to spend a lot of time on, which is perspective. We're going to talk a little bit about narrative, and I'm going to talk a little bit about upskill. Those are 2 methods or strategies we use to really engage this generation well. And when you're engaging any of your employees well, whether they're your employees or your customer, then success is not far behind. And so that's the journey I'm going to take you on. Please know that every human is an individual. I have to say this because it's important for you to know. However, we have never, ever had so much compelling data about any global generation. Millennials were the first generation where we had so much content. Gen Z is the second generation we have so much content. The biggest difference is this: millennials was not global. Gen Z is global. So almost entirely you could take a Gen Z from anywhere in the world, and there are similarities that we've never seen before. And that's what's really shifted and why this conversation is so compelling. I'm going to unpack that in a little bit more detail for you. But here's what I want you to see before we dive into Gen Z specifically. We've had the following generations. We've had the greatest generation, the silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X, probably the greatest generation of all, millennials, Gen Z, and Alpha. Those are the generations we've had. Every single generation has flipped, has changed because of a number of factors that came into the world that weren't there when they started living their lives. And so I'm not going to show you those now. We can go into detail, but I'll tell you very quickly. The greatest generation didn't have a radio or telephone, and then they got a radio and telephone, and it changed everything. Changed how they communicated, what they valued, how they engaged with one another, changed every facet of their lives. Think about that. Silent generation didn't have electricity, and then the Hoover Dam brought electricity to massive parts of the United States. No electricity, now we have it. What you value, how you live your day-to-day life changes. You look at boomers, famous for Woodstock, they got the television and the microwave. Think about how that changed life. Mom didn't have to stand in the kitchen all day to cook. She had the microwave, and now the family would sit around television and have dinner. Didn't happen before that. Gen X, the PC came home. When my PC came home, all I had on it was a flight simulator. That's the only game I had. Then we look at millennials. Internet changed the way they lived their lives on a daily basis. And then we look at Gen Z, and we know that the smartphone has changed everything about the way they do life, everything. And of course, after them comes Alpha, and we already know that artificial intelligence has changed the way they live life. Here's the point. No generation wakes up and decides to be different. Every generation wakes up and the world around them has changed, and as a result, they behave differently. There has been nothing so marked as the shift with Gen Z, which is why we're having this conversation. What you must know and see is that every generation at some point are teenagers going through a phase. But here's what I want you to catch, and it's the first thing you really need to catch, is Gen Z are not just teenagers going through a phase. They're also teenagers going through a phase. They are actually fundamentally wired differently. That's why my book is called Aliens Among Us, because I'm joking that they're aliens, because they are wired in a way like no other generation has ever been wired. 52% of the world's population is under the age of 30. And that is, broadly speaking, the generations Gen Z and Alpha. And they are and have already started to rewire how we communicate, what we value, how we buy, how we sell. And that's why it's important to understand them so that we can lead them well. 4 reasons that this generation are so different. I call it the perfect storm, and there's 4 things that make up this perfect storm that have wired and changed this generation. There are not only 4 things, but these are the 4 main things. So I'm going to fly through these. The first is technology. That shouldn't surprise you. And when you look at technology, it took 68 years for the airline to get 50 million users. It took 19 days for Pokemon Go to get 50 million users. It's called, broadly speaking, the doubling time. When you look at something called Moore's Law talks about the doubling time of a transistor. And when you look at how the time has doubled since the airline's taken 68 years to today, in fact, Pokemon Go, that was in 2018, right? And so Call of Duty, an online game in 2019, got 100 million users in 7 days. My point is this: technology is impacting us today more than it has ever impacted us. 68 years ago, the change in technology was generally so slow that you didn't notice the change. Today, the change is visible to you every single day. I'm not going to spend more time on technology or any of these because I want to get through a whole lot. First thing was technology. The second thing is world news. Please tell me somebody on this call grew up petrified that they were going to die in quicksand one day. I was like, I only went outside of my house when I was 15 years old because I was scared I was going to die in quicksand. Mom, is there still quicksand? Oh, Steve, I don't know. Like, I'm not going outside until they got rid of all the quicksand. Here's what world news has got to do with quicksand. There's a thing called mean world syndrome. It's a cognitive bias that was studied in the 1970s. And the cognitive bias is really this, that you have an irrational fear of the world outside, predominantly because of what you watch and what you listen to. In 1970, world news came on for an hour a day and you'd read the newspaper. Look at today, we're plugged in 24/7. I know what's going on around the world the instant it happens. And so when you understand the significance of mean world syndrome and how news goes only two ways, horror or humor. Those are the only two things that sell. And so when you look at news, watch the news and you'll see horror takes the stage 99% of the time. My point is that we are at a place where world news is broadcasting horror 24/7. And so that's the second component that has changed the way Gen Z and all of us actually look at the world and think. And as a result, we have this irrational fear of the world. Data actually will show you we're living the safest, healthiest, wealthiest time in recorded human history, but we feel like we're going to die tomorrow. Interesting fact. The third thing, social media. Now, I know we all know there's two sides of the coin to social media. Here's what you've got to see about social media. It is a communication tool, and it's already changing the way every one of us behave. Look at this young girl, 2 years, 3 years old. I don't know how old. Her behavior has changed already because of that. But here's what you've got to see. It's not going anywhere. Social media is one of the main funnels that provides data to shops, to businesses that are trying to sell their goods, and that will only be amplified. Social media is here to stay, and it's the third thing that has changed the way we look at the world and behave in the world. It's important for you to know, by the way, if you're a business, you should be a part of social media because it's a way to understand how customers value, what they value, and how they live on a daily basis. Even if you're like this fellow who doesn't engage, you should be aware of it. You also learn to speak alien, by the way, if you're involved. And the last thing is parenting and leadership. The way we parent, the way we lead is so different. And that combination of four things is what I call the perfect storm. So what I want you to see about the perfect storm is that this has come into the world in a way that has changed and rewired how Gen Z and Alpha generation live, what they do, what they believe. Those four things I want to explain to you in an analogy. So this is the second thing that if you take this away, you'll be well on your way. If we imagine that millennials and older are blue paint, the perfect storm is yellow paint. And when you pour yellow paint onto the world or into the blue world, and you slowly stir it, you get green. Aliens happen to be green. Aliens among us. Come on, guys, make the connection already. Aliens among us. There we thank you, Steve Soares. Aliens among us. But here's what you've got to see, that the aliens have never, ever been blue. So Gen Z have never lived in a time where they have been blue. They have always seen the world in a green, through a green lens. The rest of you, including me, have lived at a time where we have looked at the world through a blue lens. So when you look at Gen Z and you start to see how they behave and you don't understand it, this is in part why. The second thing that's important about this is that when you pour yellow paint into blue paint, it will all eventually turn green and it won't go back to blue. Here's what you've got to recognize. The world is churning green and it's not going to be blue again, which means the blue people have to learn to live in a green way. We're already doing that in a number of ways, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples. We are never going back to blue. So when you think of those teenagers going through a phase, one of the risks of that is we're always waiting for the teenagers to snap out of that phase and behave like everybody else. I'm telling you, that's never going to happen. The new snap out of it is always going to look green. I hope that's making sense because that's a major point that you have to understand. Two things I'm going to share with you to show you how the world is turning green. Are you ready? The first thing is called access over ownership. We have all lived, unless you're under the age of 30, in a time where we owned stuff. We owned Encyclopedia Britannica. Anybody? Encyclopedia Britannica. all the wisdom you could ever have on the bookshelf behind you. And when somebody asked you a question, you hold that thought and you would flip through Encyclopedia Britannica and you'd say, well, I can answer that question as follows, right? We lived in a time where we had DVDs, VHS cassette tapes, even CDs. I had a whole lot of, because I was ahead of the game, a whole lot of music on my phone that I paid, I don't know, $20 for an album, right? Or $2 for a song. Today, we don't own anything. Do any of you own VHS cassette tapes from Disney that came out of the Disney vault for just a season? Get it now before it goes back in the vault. Well, I have a bunch of those, but I have nothing to play them on in my entire house. In fact, I have nothing on my house that can run CDs, DVDs, VHS. I don't even have LPs. That's become a collector's item again. Here's what you've got to see. It's not just about the fact that we have access to everything, but we own nothing. That applies to relationships and work. Think about this. My relationship with my wife, we recently had an anniversary, and I said to her, don't try this at home, by the way. I recently said to her, darling, our anniversary is coming up, and depending a little bit on how our anniversary goes, I will decide whether I'm going to renew my subscription to you. Okay, that's how relationships work. That did not go down well. Here's the thing. If you've lived in a world where everything is a light switch, access, no access, subscribe, unsubscribe, why would relationships be different? Why would work be different? It's not. That's the point. So relationships and work have moved into a whole different facet of life where compelling content or compelling relationships rarely matter. There has to be value, whereas in the past, I've bought things that have stood on a shelf and have never been touched, but I own them. So if that drops well, you'll see how significant the mindset is of living in a place where we access everything, but we own nothing. You can turn access on, and when you don't want it, you can turn access off. That is how our world currently functions. Scary as it sounds, but it's how we work. The second way you can see it is a thing called information over application. We have never lived in a time until now where we have access to all information. We know that on this phone, I could access all information known to the human species. We've never lived in a time like that. So that changes everything when it comes to the next generation, because you see, now what they need from us is not information, because they have access to all information. They don't need to come to me to explain how to drive a stick shift car like I try to teach my son. They can go on YouTube, which my son did, and find out how to drive a stick shift car, only to tell me that I was telling him wrong, and he'd figured it out on YouTube. So where does this change? Our role as leaders, as mentors, is now, because we have legacy wisdom, knowledge, and experience, we can bring to their information application. Because you see, information without application doesn't always work. We know that. And so it's just a beautiful segue, or at least a junction point, where we have the ability to connect with this next generation in a meaningful way, because we have something of value to give them. And it's not information, it's application. So those are just two ways the world has changed. What we've seen already is that this generation is wired so differently. They have the ability to solve problems, and very often not in the way that we would solve it. That's just another version of a generation that's growing up wired differently. All right. I'm going to dive into perspective a little bit deeper. Here is the problem so many of us are trying to solve, and the solution is not what we've always seen. Become like me. And so I'm going to give you some data points. All of these are really important for you just to process, to show you how dramatically different this generation is. There are 4 muscles in this generation that are really, really weak. These muscles are weak because the green world doesn't require those muscles to be used a great deal in day-to-day life, okay? It's not because Gen Z or Alpha don't want to go to the gym, figuratively speaking, right? It's because they don't have an opportunity to do this. So the first is problem solving. There is the journey we're on, there are not a lot of opportunities to truly solve problems in the same way as previous generations did. And as a result, that muscle is very, very weak for this generation. The second muscle is communication. We have a generation that 35% of their communication is digital. And so when it comes to having conversations that are deep and meaningful and challenging, they have not had the same amount of practice as previous generations. And I'm going to show you another data point around that. Second muscle. The third one is perseverance, which is different from problem solving. We have a generation that does not have a lot of opportunity to persevere. And those three muscles are critical to our survival tomorrow. Do you know that the data says that students in 6th grade today, 65% of them will work in jobs that don't yet exist? So how do you as a parent, as a mentor, as a business owner prepare them when 65% of the jobs that they're going to do one day don't yet exist? Well, three of the ways you're going to do it is you're going to strengthen these muscles: problem solving, communication, perseverance. And the last one, which is the most complicated / easy / important one, is gratitude. We have a generation having come through COVID that is very self-centered and very siloed, and gratitude is in really low supply. And here, by the way, it's not just Gen Z and Alpha generation, all of us. All you need to do is go and stand in a line somewhere or drive on the highway, and you'll see very quickly how little gratitude we currently are operating in. These four things are critical as leaders, and we often use, which I'm going to share a little bit about, an invisible curriculum to strengthen these muscles, because as you strengthen these muscles in an invisible curriculum, you start to see a different person come out of that. All right, data points. They have been and are CEOs of their own lives. So from day one, they've grown up in charge. Nothing bad about that, nothing completely new about that. But to the degree where it is today, where they have been CEOs of their own lives all the way through college, and then you get them to sit in a cubicle and they're like, why would I do that? I've never done that before. Well, work is from 9 until 5. Like, I don't like to work from 9 until 5. I'm really good from like 5:30 till 11:45 at night. That's like my sweet spot. Well, that's not how business works. Well, that's how I'd like to work. Don't be surprised. I have a marketing person who I allowed to be fractional and remote, and she works like the craziest hours, but it ends up working. CEOs of their own lives, they always have been, and so they have been determining what they do, when they do, how they do it. It shouldn't come to you as a surprise when they question when you want them to do something that doesn't necessarily make sense to them. 72% of them want to start their own businesses. For any of you that have your own businesses, you'll know that's the easiest thing to say, and everybody wants to do that until you're sitting on the other side of the desk and you have to navigate what that looks like, which is why mentoring someone to come alongside you is absolutely the key. This is a generation that believe they are 80% more driven than their peers. Why? Because they are desperately nervous of the future. They know they need to get ahead, and they are trying really hard to do that. They are also almost 90%. That is a significant statistic, where they will spend their free time in a productive learning way. Millennials would hang out with their friends. Gen Z, almost 90% of them, if they have free time, they are trying to upskill. They're trying to get ahead. They're trying to learn. That is a massive, massive, massive shift. And in part, the reason for them spending 40% less in-person time with friends than millennials. Listen to that for a second. We spoke about communication earlier. They spend 40% less in-person time with friends. Please understand, when you're with friends in person, you are practicing a whole lot of social skills that you don't even recognize that you're practicing. When you spend 40% less time, you have 40% less time to practice any of those skills, which is why when sometimes they show up in the workplace, those skills aren't as refined as people that are millennials and older, and or refined might be the wrong word, but they don't fit into that mold as quickly that millennials and older have in place. This is a generation that's growing up really fast and really slow at the same time. Really fast because they have access to all information. Some of it is really, really mature. And really slow because, by the way, the mature content, some of us don't have the social bandwidth to navigate some of the content that we see. Never mind the younger kids, right? And so they're getting exposed to a whole lot, but they're also data says that they're between 3 and 5 years behind millennials on the maturity curve. So a 20-year-old millennial, a 15-year-old Gen Z, sorry, the other way around. If you're a 20-year-old Gen Z, you're equivalent to a 15-year-old millennial at the same time, between 3 and 5 years behind social development. It's not a problem. It's not an issue. It's something important for you to understand. And there's reasons for it, because they're siloed, and I don't want to say lonely, because there's data about anxiety, suicide, depression, and loneliness. My point is that they're growing up in a silo, not with their friends. However, it's the smartest generation we've ever encountered. So smart on levels we are excited about. And they are going to, and already are bringing solutions that we haven't thought about. Only 52% of the world population is under the age of 30. Some of those are already owning businesses, are in leadership roles, and are creating innovative ideas that are changing the world we live in already. And the oldest of them are 30. Amazing. They're also the most cause-driven generation we've ever encountered. They see what's wrong, they see what's right, and they're aware of it. And they are going to call it out, which is fantastic, by the way. The only thing is they don't really know what to do with that yet. So they're in a place where they are able to see and call it out. The internet's helped them do that, but they are not yet at a place where they create solutions. Remember, problem solving and perseverance, those two areas. Alpha generation, however, are going to change our world dramatically. There is something that they have developed living like this, and actually all of us have. Every one of us on the call is green in this capacity. It's called an 8-second filter. If you read any data, it will be referred to as an 8-second attention span. That's a fallacy. It's wrong. This is the correct thing. It's called an 8-second filter. And the premise of it is simple. Every single one of them and us is listening to content and processing that content. Within 8 seconds, they decide whether it's worth their attention or not. We all do that. We scroll through our phones, we look at our emails, we accept certain phone calls and others we don't, because we have only so much bandwidth, and we have to make a decision. What are we going to allow in to our world to process and deal with? So it might look like an attention span, but once you catch their attention, they deep dive and they focus like nobody else. Experts, they deep dive. What we think we see is that they have an 8-second attention span. Well, it's not. It's a filter, and we all have that same filter. And what does this filter lead to? It leads to one of the economies we live in right now. It's a permission-based economy. I have to have permission to come alongside you, to speak into your life, and you will give me permission when I have something of value to bring to you. Honestly, that's how it should always have been. It hasn't, and now we're going into that space where if I have value, you will pay attention and listen to me. It's a bit of a curve, so a bit of a roller coaster ride. So we're on one of the peaks that will settle a little bit, but that value is important. I want to talk to you about the DNA of leadership, and I'm going to be very quick about this. But I want you to see something. We all look for growth, not only in our business, but in the humans that work within our business. We're also looking for growth in many ways for the people that our businesses serve. But I want you to catch the chain, the DNA connection, which leads to that. And this is from a leadership perspective, something really important to grasp when we lead the next generation. And again, it's actually always been the best way to lead. We've just got away from it over the last number of generations. So I'm going to start with number 8 at the bottom, relationship. Relationship is everything. And for those of us that are in faith, we understand that relationship with God the Father is key, right? It is the foundation of everything we do. When it's at work, relationship is everything. Relationship means that people can trust you. People trust you because you do what you say you're going to do. People trust you because they know that you have not only the life and the value of the business in mind, you have them in mind. And there's this thing called, under relationship, called the comitatus connection. It's from Anglo-Saxon English literature. And the premise is when the lord of the manor would rush out to battle, all the people that worked for him would charge after him. Why? Because they had such a deep relationship. They would die for the lord of the manor. That won't happen unless there's a deep relationship and connection, which is built out of trust. Trust is the key, and it takes time to earn it. Trust leads to something called transparency, and transparency is really important because when we're able to be transparent with one another, which is not as easy as it sounds, we're able to hold each other accountable. So now I can say, here is where you need to grow your muscles. I can help you do that. And accountability, which is one of the greatest deficits of our modern world, accountability and expectations, leads from transparency. Because I know you want to grow in a certain area, I'm going to hold you accountable to grow in that area. Those four things are so important. Here's what they lead to. They lead to narrative. Narrative is a story. Narrative is this, in fact, it's not just a story, it's an historical story. A narrative is always a story of something that's already happened. And what happened? Well, I have a relationship and trust with someone, so much so that I could be transparent. We determined where I can grow, and they held me responsible. They held me accountable, and I grew. And now I'm retelling the story of that growth. I will give you a couple of examples at the end of what that looks like. That narrative is absolutely important. There is always a narrative in your business, in your family, in your friendship circle. The only question is it positive or is it negative? Those are the only two options, right? And so when we understand relationship, trust, transparency, and accountability, that is how you generate positive narrative. Narrative validates your culture. We determine our core values are as follows. Well, are they aspirational or are they transformational? One day we will be really good to our customers. That's aspirational because we don't really know how to be good to our customers just yet, right? But we're learning. If your narrative is real, it's going to validate what's truly going on in your culture. Your culture is not just words on the wall. Your culture is actually what's happening in your business. And when you listen to the narrative, you'll know what your real culture is. And then hopefully it aligns with what's on the wall. When you have that in place in a positive way, your engagement goes through the roof. Engagement leads to productivity, it leads to retention, and it leads to recruitment. Unbelievable. Engagement is also a result of somebody who's transformed. I've spoken to so many people that have been transformed by the culture in their business that it changes how they behave at home. Beautiful. That leads to growth. Cause and effect. The cause is always when we look at relationship, trust, transparency, and accountability. That is where the roots of the plant are, and anything that has got to do with narrative, culture, engagement, and growth, you will find the reason, the cause of it down below. Don't have more time to dive through that. I just wanted to give you a sense from a leadership perspective. If that cycle is not in place properly, you will not have the results, the effect that you're looking for, especially with this next generation where relationship and trust are key. And as I said to you, the greatest deficit in leadership today is accountability. And that's what this addresses. Okay. Let's quickly talk about narrative. I'm going to just give you some examples, and then I'm going to try and bring it back because we don't have time to go through narrative in a deep way. I told you narrative is already an historical account. So here's one example, Domino's Pizza. They changed the way people look at working for Domino's. Nobody that I've ever met has wanted to go to Domino's. What is your dream? My dream is to make pizzas for Domino's. I have not yet met that person, right? Here's what they've done. They have an ad campaign. You can go and look at it. There were 3 ads. I'm only going to tell you about one. 3 of them are genius. The one ad they ran was a young lady who said, I started making pizzas for Domino's when I was 17. Now I own 2 franchises. So what they've done is they've gone deliberately into a journey that would change the narrative of what it looked like to work at Domino's. And as a result, their culture has shifted. That's what I want you to catch. Narrative is critical because what we've got when we're looking at customers, when we look at employees, they want to believe that the narrative about your business is something that they want to be a part of. And I'm going to show you how you do that. When we look at on the more personal basis, your home is the most boring place to be. There is nothing more boring than being at your house. Why? Because when you're at home, this is what happens at home. At home, you have the following. Do your homework, go to bed, clean the floor, do the dishes, and mom and dad are sitting watching television. Your home has to become the most compelling place for your child and other children to be. And you can just do 1 or 2 little things to make that a reality, and it changes the narrative and the culture of what your home actually looks like. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to just touch briefly on the upskill paradox. Here's what you've got to see. There's 2 kinds of leaders. Both of them have a place, but not like you think. You have a SOS, sage on stage. You have a coach, and you have a carpenter. Those are already the same thing. Or you can have something called a GPS, a guide positioned by the side, which is the same as a mentor or a gardener. What I want you to see is that the sage on stage mentoring, the sage on stage leadership has been around since the second industrial revolution, where humans were actually different. And that kind of leadership does not produce any results today. So if you are in that mindset of leading through SOS, Sage on Stage, which I'm going to show you what that looks like, you are not going to get the same results. So let me explain it to you like this. Sage on Stage. I have all the information, do what I tell you. There is only one place that this works, and that is in a place of skill acquisition. So when someone is learning a skill, like how to shoot a rifle in the army, how to score a goal, anything like this, how to go out of a specific door because there's a fire in your building, that is where Sage on Stage works. Do what I tell you because I'm in charge. Skill acquisition. There is no other time that it produces the same kind of fruit as GPS, a guide positioned by the side. So the SOS is the same as a coach. Now, this is not a coach in the form of mentor. The coach is, this is in the sense of a coach saying, take the ball and kick it over there. And this is the same as a carpenter who takes a piece of wood and turns it into a table. The wood had no choice what it was going to become. The GPS, on the other hand, is like I do every day. Where would you like to go today, Steve? I would like to go here. Well, can I show you the best way to get there? And then I say, yes, show me. And I don't always listen to the GPS and I always regret it, right? A guide positioned by the side. In essence, that's a mentor. Where do you really want to go? Let me help you get there. Let me hold you accountable and let me take some of my wisdom, my experience in my life, and let me bring that to you so that you can be a better person for the journey. The best tool that you can use in leadership, one of the best tools, is the invisible curriculum. Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off. We are teaching people how to grow muscles without them necessarily knowing that. Now, I'm going to tell you two stories. If we have time, I'll tell you more. Two stories that will explain to you what the caveat, this joining of narrative and upskill looks like. So upskill is always stretching and growing your people, because that's how we are wired. We are wired to be stretched and grown. We are not wired to stay in the comfort zone. So as you're stretching and growing your people, not in their core job, but in other areas, that is where you start to see these upskill moments. And that is where what happens from there is these narratives bubble up. They're like, oh, you won't believe what happened. And as a result of that, it changes your culture. So I'm going to quickly tell you two. Logan, how are we doing for time? How many minutes have we got before the Q&A? Don't say what. Three. So she's showing me 3, but what she means is 30. So we're good. I'm going to get through at least 2 stories. Okay. This story is a real story. What you see on the screen are these 4 delicious things called brigadeiros. It's in Brazil. And this is a photo I actually just found. I took it in my hotel room. I went to a hotel and I stayed in a hotel in Brazil. They created this moment for me that I'm still telling the story about today. I come home from meetings. I had a bag of these brigadeiros, not those, but similar in my hand that I was given as a gift. And the gentleman at the concierge says, where can I recommend a place for dinner? I said, no, I'm going to eat these for dinner because I'm flying out tomorrow. Well, we laughed because how do you eat 6 brigadeiros for dinner? Well, I did. Next time I came back there 7 months later, I walked into my room and this is what I found. What I should have done is take a picture of the note that they sent or wrote. They wrote a note saying, Mr. Robertson, we know how you love brigadeiros. We've been excited for you to return. Here are some things for you to sample. My mind was blown. You see, what they've done is they've trained their staff to pay attention to some detail that 7 months later impacted my life in a significant way. The next time I came back there, I walked into my room. Guess what? There was no brigadeiros. What is going on in this place? I said aloud. Knock on the door. Guess what happens? There's a gentleman standing there and he's got no brigadeiros. I'm like, there must be some kind of mistake. He's forgotten my brigadeiros. Mr. Robertson, I know you've just come from Europe. I bet you have some laundry. Would you like me to take care of your laundry? Yes, would love you to take care of my laundry. Those moments have taken me back to that hotel in Brazil more than 5 times. And everybody that I know that goes there, I recommend to go there. I'm going to give you one example of what it looks like in the workplace. I don't know which story to tell you. I'm going to tell you this story instead, okay? This is a little treasure chest. It's not exactly the same one. I have a friend who has a restaurant business and he runs a pizza restaurant business. Steve, I'm struggling to maintain my staff. I can't keep wait staff servers in place. So I'm teaching him how to be a better leader while he's trying to lead his people and keep his business running. So what we do is we create this little treasure chest. And so when the server gets there one day, it's not every single day, he would say to them, Steve, I've seen what an amazing server you've been. Today, you get the treasure chest. Like me, I've got the treasure chest today. So what does it look like? Steve walks out into the restaurant carrying the treasure chest with him. Sorry, I'm in a hotel room, Mike. And so, hi, goes to a table with a whole lot of people at the table and says, may I take your order? And as he starts to take his order, I start to take the order. Now, this treasure chest of paint, so I'll put it down at the table. But you know what I've taught these people? Make sure you stand next to the kids. And the kids are like, what's in the box? What's in the box? I'm like, oh, you want to see what's in the box? I'm looking around. I'm the only one in the restaurant that has this box. Can we see what's in the box? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. And by the way, here's the invisible curriculum. If they don't ask what's in the box, you don't open the box. So then you say, well, I'll tell you what's in the box. Let me open it. And I open it up. And there's all these things. Well, you see these things in the box. There's a little watch. There's all these little things, right? These are secret keys. Do what? Well, if you have one of these, that'll get you into the kitchen to make pizzas tonight. Would you like to make pizzas? I would love to make pizzas. Mom, Dad, can they come and make pizzas in the kitchen? Yes, they can. So here's what you've got to understand. The box, they get to keep whatever they took out of the box. Okay, so that's their little trinket that they'll keep forever. That also gets them permission to go into the kitchen. And the kitchen knows that one of the servers is going to bring children into the kitchen. So there's a table planned and prepared for them. They come into the kitchen, they're ready to make pizza. But just before the server goes in, the server turns to the parents and says, would one of you like to video this? Oh, yes. Mom or dad comes and videos this. You know what happens? That is the best pizza anybody has ever eaten. Why? Because the kids made it. Whether it was good or bad, it's the best we've ever had. That video of the kids making pizza went to everybody in the family and every friend you can ever imagine. You know what else happened? That server got the biggest tip they ever got. And that treasure chest does not come out of the safe every single day. It's when one of the employees has done good work and gets recognized. My point is this. There is a way to create narrative that uses leadership skills to stretch and challenge your employees and you as a leader, that creates a narrative that delights and surprises, and the results are spectacular. Come on, Logan. 1 minute over, baby. I have many more stories if you're interested, but let's see if we have any questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I hope many of you can stay around for the Q&A that we're about to go into while you get your questions ready. Steve did not ask me to do this. He did this out of the goodness of his heart, and maybe partially because he's on the board, but mainly out of the goodness of his heart. But a lot of this content is in his book, Aliens Among Us. It's a fantastic book. Logan, maybe you could put the Amazon link in the chat in case anyone wants to get that. Again, Steve did not ask me to say that. Another thing, I know some of you might drop off, and also some of you came on late. In case you didn't hear Ryan talk about Ardent Mentoring, I will give you the 15-second spiel. We offer one-on-one mentoring for social entrepreneurs. And if you're interested at all at either becoming a mentor with Ardent Mentoring, or if you have a business and you're interested in mentoring, Logan is going to drop Ryan and I's contact information. We would love to talk to you. Even if you're on the fence, schedule a call with us and we can talk about it and see if maybe it's a good fit for you. And now let's move into the Q&A time. We have a few questions that have come in, and we will also call on people. How'd you get those balloons, Steve? Do you just have to clap? How'd that happen?
Not only balloons, you've got all sorts of things going on, and I haven't cracked the code.
You know how to get them going?
I think AI just decides when it's supposed to show up. So far, it's been good.
No, I can't do it. I don't know. It's telepathic, I guess. All right, who's up? Who's first? Gerald had a question. I think he was the first one to come. Gerald, do you want us to just answer? We'll just ask it. Is there a way of accessing the DNA chart that was explained?
Yeah, for a small fee, you can access anything you want. By all means, if you connect with me, I'd be happy to share it. It is trademarked and copyrighted by me, but I'm happy to share it with you and explain to you in detail how it works. There's a lot of detail around each of those 8 steps, but truly happy to share that information with you. So at no cost.
Excellent.
Steve, how would you like them to connect with you? What's the best way?
You can decide, Ryan. You can drop my contact information. They can go through whatever you want, whatever's easier for you. I'm happy to get my contact information if that's what you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. Drop in the chat, maybe email.
Okay. If there's no questions, I'm happy to tell you another story or two that illustrates what that looks like. So you guys can tell me. I'm not looking at the chat, so you can tell me.
Do you see any hands? You let me know.
Hiram had his hand raised, but then you went to the chat. So let's go with Hiram next.
Sounds good.
Can you hear me?
Nice to see you, Hiram.
Nice to see you too. Okay, I got a few questions. So as a member of Gen Z, I definitely see what you're talking about with a lot of my generation feeling like they work harder than their peers. And I have a question I think would be interesting. I'd love to pick your brain on, which is, how can someone in our generation, in your opinion, get a better perspective of how much work our peers are doing so we know how to best place ourselves? Because I think understanding where you're at relatively is going to be really valuable.
Remember that, any generation that's coming up, that's not their responsibility, right? It's the responsibility of the older generation to create opportunities for the younger generation to walk in that. And we always look down from an older generation to a younger generation. We're like, why don't they? But that's never been the way things go. And I'm not being the college coach that isn't prepared to throw a forward pass. I'm saying to you that the natural generation evolution is that the older generation should create opportunities for them to go. Having said that, it is always, always critical that as parents or as Gen Z yourself, that you are looking at how can you fit into a world. Think about it this way. When you go to a cocktail party, which some people would think is the most awkward thing you've ever experienced, if you practice going to a cocktail party, you can become good at going to a cocktail party and connecting and engaging with people. Those next generations, those people in the next generation, when they look and understand the value that the older generations have and start to lean in, they will very, very quickly be welcomed in and find opportunities for them to be in the conversation. Why? Because they are crazy smart, crazy entrepreneurial. And so I didn't answer your question well, but what I am saying to you is that if you are aware enough to recognize that you aren't the only thing that matters, you're already halfway there. And that's the hardest thing for any teenager to recognize. There's data that says the most dangerous thing on the planet is a male under the age of 27. There's nothing more dangerous on this planet, apparently. Now, true or not, I don't know, but what I can tell you is this, that the brain takes a while to develop. And so let's say 25, up until the age of 25, to expect a generation younger than 25 to get everything someone older than 25 gets, it's just not logical, right? There are just certain synapses that aren't firing in the same way. But our job as the older generation is to try and come alongside the younger generation and walk with them as a GPS and guide them to the best version of themselves that they can be. So, long answer. I don't know if I even answered your question.
It works. And then I had one more question. And you may not have a good answer because I'm not sure a good answer exists, and then I'll be quiet. So, on my own kind of entrepreneurial journey and trying to figure out why I'm going and what I want to do, I'm very much finding myself, I have like this goal, I have this North Star I'm heading towards, but I'm carving out different paths, and I'm having difficulty finding someone who can mentor me because I'm like, I don't know which path I'm on. And so it can be very difficult to find a mentor to help you if you're switching paths. So I'll give an example. When I last met with you, we talked about kind of doing a lot of social media work, but I kind of made the decision that I didn't want to be at the whims of social media and clickbait because I felt like I would have to portray some of my values to be really successful within that market. And so I'm trying to figure out a different way to tackle the same problem that we discussed. And so I'm actually looking at doing something similar to a game store, but for like men's clothing retail, and there's a whole bunch into that. But with me changing direction so much, and I think a lot of people in my generation changing directions and having a hard time finding which path to take. How can we find a mentor if we even find a mentor, we might be switching in the next month or two because we're trying to pivot and be more practical in our approach to the problem?
So you've addressed probably the greatest challenge that we as a global navigating right now. And there's there's a product that I created called a Vision Vault, and the Vision Vault goes with a thing called the spec model. And so here's the shortest version. The important thing for you to get is, first of all, where are you going? What you've just described is what so many people are going through when they're in the place of being a founder. There's a thing called a founder mindset and a CEO mindset. So the founder mindset is exactly where you are. It's the innovative, creative thinking about all these things that you could and would like to do. Until you pick one and take a step, you will never actually take a step. And the best way for you to navigate that is to get a mentor. So what does that mentor help you do? That mentor helps you go through your whole list of all these dreams, thoughts, suggestions, and ideas and figure out, this is the one I'm going to go after. Even if it's not the best one, even if after 2 days I change my mind, until you take a step, you actually end up staying in the same place. And so part of the whole Vision Vault journey is to get you out of future thinking. Let me rephrase that. It's to curb the future thinking and get you into the present to actually do something. Most people that you're going to ask to mentor you aren't going to be experts in the exact thing that you need them to be, but they're going to be experts because they've lived and experienced a whole lot. And especially in this environment we're in today, we also have Holy Spirit and are spirit led. And so the wisdom of the kingdom that people carry, right? And so the most powerful mentors are the ones that help you figure out what the next steps are and hold you accountable, which is different from mentoring, hold you accountable to taking those steps. As soon as you take a step, you'll figure out very quickly if that's the direction you want to go in. But what happens is we get stuck in a place of, I've got these 4 different options, and a year later, you still have 4 options and you haven't taken one step and made a move. And so the fact you've just described very, very well, the state of the world that we live in is that we all have these dreams and we get stuck in this, believe it or not, it's a comfort zone because we're processing everything in our heads. That doesn't equate to actually doing something. And the brain science around that is scary. If you stay in that place too long, it's part of the reason we're in a place of anxiety, depression, and suicide, because the brain very quickly understands that all you do is think about things and never actually do anything. And so there's a whole lot of brain science around that too. Point, Hiram, get a mentor to help you figure out what your next step is and take a step. The second you take a step, you're no longer in the place you were, and your perspective on everything is different. And you'll know very quickly if it's the right one or the wrong one. Weighing up 20 different options never got anybody anywhere.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else want to raise their hand, be so bold? I know there's probably a lot churning in your brains right now. Maybe you haven't processed it all, but I'm sure if you're thinking it, someone else is too. So feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. While people are, did we just get a hand? Yeah, Ryan, go ahead. Can you unmute Ryan Logan?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. And more around just thank you, Stephen. Like, what an outstanding job you did presenting. And in that you're talking about millennials and you're actually showing us by using little video clips and pictures and keeping it very dynamic to show that's how a lot of the millennials also think and process things. So you're verbally telling us, you're visually showing us, and captivating us with some really good thought leadership. So well done.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Ryan, did you just raise your hand?
I did. I'm trying to follow the rules.
I'm okay. I'm just not used to you following the rules.
I know. I looking at the DNA, Steve, you said relationships everything, and then looking back at my notes, you said with Gen Z, 40% less are in-person time with their friends, so they're losing social skills. So when I put those two things together, how do we help this next generation make up those social skills if relationship is everything?
So that's why the leadership model has to change. If we want to be future-proof businesses and you don't yet get some of this, you will not be around in 5 to 10 years, guaranteed. And so the point is that from a leadership perspective within your business, understanding some of these data points, and there's a lot more, we obviously didn't have time to get through everything. When you start to understand that how you train, how you engage, how you coach within your business, in essence, how you lead is completely different. And when you lead in a way that starts to address the ability to have relationship, the ability to communicate, because we are cross-generational in just about every business. We have up to 5 generations that are still in the workplace right now. So as soon as you start to address those, that's where the growth, that's where the upskill happens. And so, you know, the difference is this. If I hire someone to be a forklift driver in my business, I'm not going to, generally speaking, bring them in and teach them to be a forklift driver. I'm going to expect them to know how to drive a forklift, right? It's like if I hire a bus driver, they need to know how to drive a bus. But what I am going to do is I'm going to make sure that in the course of my day, because we all are busy, right? In the course of my day, I care enough about my people to build a relationship with them so that I can get trust and that I can then look behind the curtain and see where there is an opportunity to help them grow, challenge them and grow them in that area. And so what we're talking about is a customized leadership that truly is one-on-one. And if you stop for the one and you help them and you challenge them and you grow them, that narrative spins up and starts to become part of your culture. And once you've done something like that, you move on to the next. And so what we do when I work with businesses is we cascade that across the leadership. And once the leadership get it, they cascade it down slowly, one at a time, and it transforms everything. So what does the relationship look like? It looks like it's always supposed to look. It looks like me coming alongside you because I actually care about who you are, and I'm going to come and walk alongside you until such time as you are able to be challenged and grow in a certain area. And as you do that, the delight and the surprise spills over onto everybody, including your customers. And so that's the journey. So as you recognize, and we've always done this, right? We've always recognized this person's weak in this area and we've tried to upskill them. Well, we now have recognized that there's an entire generation that are incredibly weak in a whole lot of areas in the old style of business. And while we're transitioning from the old style of business to the new style, which could take a generation, right? We have to understand how do we bridge that gap with them. So spot on, you hit the nail on the head, Ryan. That's very real. And that's the purpose of this conversation. How do I upskill them in a way that creates a narrative? Because the narrative is what wins. Always, always. I would never go and work at Domino's, but if I could win, if I could work at Domino's and own 2 franchises, wow, maybe I'll go work at Domino's.
Thank you. Very helpful. I think Michelle had a question.
Steve, okay. Ryan, you didn't raise your hand.
I know. I'm speaking in now as CEO. I think
Oh,
Michelle had a question.
I do not see her hand.
She wrote it. She said, "What are values commonly held by Gen Z?"
That's a really, really broad question. So when you say generally values, I'm going to have to give you a broad answer. So globally speaking, this generation values independence. They value self, which COVID amplified, by the way. They value the ability to self-direct, and they are also very driven by what they believe is right or wrong. Now, that's very broad and a dangerous answer because the eye of the beholder, what's right or wrong can be, is speeding right or speeding wrong, right? And so broadly speaking, that's where they are. They're also very concerned about the environment, but also bear in mind that because we're so siloed and because of mean world syndrome, which is that cognitive bias, you guys should recognize this. The way our feeds are set up, in other words, what we choose to listen to can skew our view of the world dramatically, right? So growing up 20 years ago, you would hear global news and it wouldn't be siloed. Now you can listen to political news that's all Republican or all Democrat, or you can listen to secular. So we're in a place right now where the general attitude and mindset is being swayed heavily by what you've chosen to allow into your stream. So if I decide to watch YouTube clips on baking sourdough bread, that's all I will see, and I'll never know that there's another kind of bread. I'm just using a really poor analogy. So that's a very difficult question to answer. What is real is I matter, self matters, and what I want matters, and nobody should be able to tell me what I shouldn't want. Broadly speaking, sorry for the broad answer, but that's a very, very broad question.
All right, next we have a question from Lynn. In addition to your book, what other resources do you suggest to learn more about how to apply these principles and ideas to our work?
So we haven't touched in any depth on what narrative and upskill really looks like. And so depending on whether you're looking at it in the home environment, which is critical to be able to do this in your own home, or in the work environment. So I work with companies that have 3 employees to companies that have 3,000 employees. So depending a little bit on the infrastructure, what the company looks like. Again, just a very broad question. Resources, I have tons. Reach out to me and I will share with you very specifically what I think you need for that. But I can tell you this, that, and I want to say this gently because I don't want it to sound wrong. There are not a lot of perspectives like this about the next generation yet. And as a result, you know, the oldest of Gen Z being 30, there's also just not a lot of proof of concept in the business world. I've been working with thousands and thousands of people in the next generation for 2 decades. And so I've seen it firsthand. Companies that are going to, the data point is actually currently only, I think, 18% of the workforce is Gen Z. And so, but their influence is massive. So what it looks like to roll it out in your business is very dependent on your business. I will say this just in closing that thought. Once you see this in action, couple of stories I told, once you see what that looks like, how easy it is to make it happen, you'll see that it works across every generation, and the fruit and the outcome will absolutely blow your mind. It has always been the most effective way for us to lead. I can't believe we took so long to get back there. And it's not something that I came up with. This is something that, if you look back in great leadership models, has always been there. The narrative today, unfortunately, is just a lot more real because social media and that the narrative goes out very, very quickly.
Logan, did you want to ask any of your questions? I've got one if you don't.
Sure, I'll ask one of mine. Yeah. First of all,
Okay,
thank you
great,
so much,
great.
Steve. This has been so valuable for, it's been helpful for me as a parent, and also to, you know, have greater awareness to how I work in the workplace. So thank you. My question is, if someone has a Gen Z employee right now, who seems, you know, somewhat disengaged, what is an action step they can take as a leader today to help?
Yeah. And so a lot of variables, but the point is this: the fact that you notice they're not engaged is the first step. The second thing then is to understand, do you have trust and relationship with that person? I can give you a whole lot of stories, which I won't because of time, but where once you've established what that is, now you can start to lean in and look for opportunities. And that's one of my superpowers, right? Is helping people find an opportunity to try something a little bit different. Just like that restaurant, just like finding a way that you can stretch them, challenge them, and grow them. And that's what it is. It's just one step at a time, finding something to hold them accountable to. And once you've held them accountable to it and they've done it, celebrating it. And so there's just so many examples, but it depends a little bit on the specific, you know, who they are, where they work, and what they're doing. I make it my business. And if you look at the history of Delta Airlines, the chairman of Delta Airlines, the business was saved from bankruptcy because the employees of Delta Airline put up the money to save it from bankruptcy. Why? Because the CEO would walk around the hangars of Delta Airlines at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, Steve, how's your son? How's your daughter? I know your son wanted to go. He took the time to build relationship. And if you truly have a relationship, I'll know if I had a relationship with you, Logan, and you, the Gen Z person who's struggling, I'll know what makes you tick, what you like, what you don't like. And I then, based on what I know about you, can look at paths to challenge, stretch, and engage you. And as you do that, that's where the people start getting muscles and the delight and surprise shows up. And I know it's, again, a broad answer, but you have to deliberately go after someone and help them grow outside of their core function and role in the business. And it's not hard to do. It sounds like it's hard until you've done it.
Any other questions? I've got one if no one else does. Steve, you mentioned the example of the person that's working with you, the marketing person, that you've created kind of a good system for them that works for them, works for you. But in a lot of businesses, that doesn't always work. especially if the business really is only open from 9 to 5, and that person would actually have to come in from 9 to 5 in order for the business to function, and there's no real opportunity for them to work after hours. What would you tell business owners in that scenario? Is there like a compromise that because part of it is you're trying to get people to look at this from a different perspective. There's a lot of talk, I think, right now about Gen Z and millennial when they don't want to do that kind of thing, where they don't want to conform to the way it's always been done. The word entitlement has been thrown around, those kinds of words. And you're trying to get people to take a step back and say, no, they're just looking at the world incredibly differently than you are, right? So what would you say to those business owners that really don't have many options? They're trying to get people to conform, but they're feeling that pushback. Just remember, you always have that person in the world. They've always been there. That person who's just arrogant, who just won't conform, who just, right. So painting the entire generation with that brush is not entirely fair, right? But what you've said is accurate, that generally speaking, they are looking for different ways to be able to accomplish their job, right? And so short of being a heart surgeon and having to show up in the surgery and cut my chest open and work on my heart, there probably are a number of things that you could have someone do somewhat remote, right? And so there are ways that, and I'm just going to speak globally, right? There are ways that you could have people come in certain days. The reason we don't want people to be remote is because we don't trust that they're going to work when they're not in front of you. That's the issue, right? If I was remote and I was checking all the boxes and hitting all my targets and exceeding those, nobody would have a problem. But generally speaking, leaders are concerned that if they're not in front of you, they're not working. But there's also something to collaborative working that's important. And so what I've seen work really successfully is if you are in the situation where you need people real time in person, there are ways to do 2 days in, 3 days out, 3 days in, 2 days out. And if it's, look, you've got to be on the ground 24/7, 7 days a week. Well, if that is what your business is, then you've got to change the narrative of what it looks like to work in that business. So I'm telling you 2 things here. You probably can make it work. You don't always have to be there 24/7. And if your leaders are putting clear expectations and holding people accountable, that problem goes away. The reason it's there in the first place is because we don't hold people accountable and we don't have expectations of what they're supposed to do. So in assuming your business can have that happen, there's ways to do it and do that well. Assuming your business is you have to be here 24/7, or let me say 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, well, then what you've got to make really clear is while you have to be here, the right person will come. But the reason it matters is because of who we are, what we do, how we impact the people that we work with, and the experience you're going to have here. So I'm telling you that if you're a heart surgeon and you have to show up for heart surgery, you have to be Domino's Pizza, and you have to work really hard at creating a narrative that shows people why coming to the office 5 days a week will work. I can tell you that you will not have a shortage of people that are going to want to work there. It's because we live in both worlds, and because we look at it as like, oh, well, how am I supposed to deal with this? They're entitled. That's the issue. You just need to be really clear about who you are up front in terms of expectations and then accountability, and you don't have a problem. There are definitely businesses that need you there from 8 until 5. That's what it is. And if you want to work here, that's what it is. So all the narratives around that applying there would be like that. Now, even in that kind of a business, could your accountant be remote 3 days? Probably, right? Could the heart surgeon? No, the heart surgeon's got to show up. Could the anesthetist? No, the anesthetist has to show up. And so I'm saying to you that you can find creative solutions. You've just got to determine what is acceptable to you and make that the law, and then live by your law. And people will come along, the right people will come along, especially if you're building a business that matters, especially if you're building a business that focuses and cares about relationship and trust, about the humans that work for you. Thank you, Steve. It was great. Any final questions before we wrap up? Anything burning? Last chance. No? Okay. Well, thank you so much to Yves, Suzanne, and Brian. They have some great summaries down there from their note taker. We will also send you a complete recording of this webinar. Logan will send that out to everyone who registered, so you don't have to worry about that. Thank you again to everyone who's given their time. Thank you, Steve, so much. This has been incredible. Again, grab Steve's book. It's a really good book. Ryan, do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
No, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
Steve, we could not be more thankful for your time and your expertise. I learned a ton. Can't wait till we meet again, and so good to see so many familiar faces and friends. And thank you all so much for joining us and sticking around for further Q&A.
And please reach out to us if you want to know more about Ardent. Logan, do you want to just throw our contact information down in the chat one more time, just in case anyone missed it? Please email us. We'd love to jump on a call with you and get to know you, whether or not you want to be a mentor or a mentee. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.